Hello, so today we're going to be showcasing 5 more broken team comps that are in Genshin Impact that are pretty meta right now. So all of the teams I'm going to be featuring are going to be time-stamped, and before anybody asks, no, I don't have Neuvillette, Clorinde, or Arlecchino. That is my bad. I didn't wish on them. Whoops. So I'm not going to be showcasing any of those teams, but if you guys do want to see that, there's plenty of other good types of content out there. Looking at our first team here, we have a Yoimiya Vaporize team featuring Chiori and Gilonen for added damage. So, digging into things here, looking at weapons, obviously Hu Tao's best in slot is her Staff of Homa. Now, I currently do not have that weapon. I'm going to be running her with the Skyward Spine, which has a nice energy recharge. Substat, I have a hard time getting her ult up because I have her geared more towards a crit build, so this will be okay. Her best free-to-play option is going to probably be the White Tassel, since it has like an increased attack bonus on there for the normal attack, which is kind of like what Hu Tao is doing 90% of the time, and it's got a crit rate substat, so you can't really beat it. And, you know, the Black Tassel is also okay if you were in kind of like a mixed HP team, but the Refinement substat doesn't really help out at all. So if you were going to use her with like Farina or something like that, it could prove useful, but I would hold off on it for the most part. Her best artifacts are going to be Crimson Wither Flames. Now, I like to run her more in a hybrid build, so I have her 2-piece Glad, 2-piece Crimson. Her best substats are going to be crit rate and crit damage, and you do want to prioritize HP percent, and in most cases, a Pyro Damage Goblet. Now, getting into Chiori, we have her set up on her signature weapon, and that's what we'll be running her with today, the Iraku Misugiri. Now, another great option for her is the Flute of Espitzel. That is an amazing free-to-play weapon that you can get with the release of Notland now, and it has a defense percent base stat, and it is really, really, really strong because it also boosts defense when you use your elemental skill. And with refinements, this will just get even better and better. Another great option for Chiori is going to be any crit damage scaling sword. Now, whether that's the black sword or, you know, a jade cutter or something like that, just keep your eyes out. It's going to be awesome. Now, getting into her artifacts, I like to run her on the Husk of Opulent Dream set. You're going to really want to prioritize defense percent unless she is at a higher constellation where attack percent can become more valuable. But with her talents, they do tend to scale better with, you know, defense percent over attack percent. Still having attack is nice, though. So with her talents, you're going to mainly want to focus on having her elemental skill and elemental burst leveled. Her normal attack and charged attack is not that useful. The majority of her damage is going to be coming from her elemental skill. Now, getting into Yolan here, her best in slot is going to be the Omni Simulacra, and this is a premium 5-star weapon as well. Scales with crit damage, and it also increases HP. So, with Yolan, it gets a little tricky looking to other options for her that are free to play. Now, I did a little bit of research, and I was kind of seeing that the Fading Twilight was a good option, you know, but that's not necessarily too free to play. And other craftable options would be like the Song of Stillness or the King's Squire, just as stat sticks. They don't help out too much, but they are better bow options than anything that is maybe not like a sacrificial bow or something like that if you're not struggling for energy recharge. And her best in slot artifacts are typically going to be Emblem of Seven Fate. You mainly want to focus on energy recharge, as your burst damage here is going to scale with your energy recharge. So, you know, if you get enough off your artifacts, you don't necessarily need to have it on your weapon. Oftentimes, it's better to just have crit rate or crit damage. Now, with her talents, you're mainly going to want to focus on having her elemental skill and elemental burst leveled. I would prioritize the elemental burst over anything else because that is what's going to be determining most of your damage output. Now, finally, with Chiori here, I'm going to be running her on the Peep Patrol song, but her typical, best in slot free-to-play weapon is also going to be the Flute of Espitzel, just because of that defense percent scaling. Currently, her best in slot artifact set is the Scroll of the Hero Cinder City. This is going to be boosting her Night Soul Burst damage. It's going to be boosting elemental type damage for nearby party members. It's going to do a lot of cool, crazy things. And with her talents, you mainly want to focus on her elemental skill here, because this is what's going to be decreasing that elemental resistance of opponents. And her burst is nice in Farina teams or anything like that, where you need a little bit of consistent healing to kind of help offset some of the damage that you're taking or damage that you're imputing on yourself. Getting into our next team here, we're going to be having Yoimiya as our Vaporize DPS, with Yelan, Bennett, and Farina all as kind of sub-DPSs, buffers, or healers. So with Yelan, we're going to keep her the same as before. And now Bennett is a wonderful character here in these situations, because he allows you to essentially boost all of your party's damage based off of his base attack. So running any weapon that has high base attack is going to be great for him. One of his best in slot weapons is the Keela Favonius, because it has the highest base attack of any sword in the game as far as I'm aware. And it also happens to kind of just give this amazing HP regen effect whenever he is damaged, essentially. And that is based off of attack, so he kind of heals a little bit, and it occurs pretty frequently in rotation, so it kind of gives him that little bit of extra resistance. Now, with free-to-play options, you can kind of go, kind of across the board. You could take, Sapwood Blade, which is another great option. That's a craftable weapon available in Sumeru. And you could also go with the Prototype Rancor, which is another high base attack weapon, albeit it's probably not as popular now as the Sapwood Blade. Artifacts, you're going to typically want to run him on Noblesse with energy recharge, unless, you're running a 5-star weapon option like this, what is it called? I think it's called the Skyward Sword, which has that base energy recharge. So unless you're running that, you're typically going to want to stack up your energy recharge right around to like 180 to 200%, depending on if you're running him in a mono or, more pyro teams. So essentially, constellations, everybody knows for the most part, you tend to want to avoid his C6 unless you really want it to imbue characters' damage with Pyro for some niche builds, but I am holding off on that as well. For talents, you really just want to focus on leveling up his ultimate, or I guess his elemental burst. You don't really want to touch anything else, because he's not going to be on fielding, and his skill's only going to trigger when you're trying to generate particles with him, and it does nothing else for his kit. Getting into Yoimiya, we're going to want to focus on her, elemental skill damage, which imbues her normal attacks with additional damage. The weapon I run on her is Rust, because it increases normal attack damage overall by 80%, which is affected by her elemental skill. And some great options for her are the Thundering Pulse, if you have it, and, if not, I would recommend probably the Slingshot is a good free-to-play option, because it does boost normal or charge attack damage if you are very close to the target, essentially. So if you're shielded, you can get up nice and close, and then this number is going to end up being somewhere in the range of, 60%? Yeah, 60% at R5. So it's a pretty good go. It's also got a crit rate base stat. I mean, even though the base attack is a little bit low on it, I think that the substats more than enough make up for it. So if you're okay with it, I would definitely give that a try. Artifacts, I like to run her Shimenawa's and Glad, just because I like the extra attack, but Shimenawa's is probably her best in slot with the 4-piece set, because it allows the character to generate more damage on their normal attacks based off of how much energy that they currently have in possession. Albeit with this set, you might need to run a little bit more or a little bit less energy recharge based on kind of what you need. So it can be a little bit more finicky to figure out than this, and you're going to want to run an attack percent Sands and a pyro damage goblet in 90% of the time, I guess. Talents, you're really going to want to focus on her normal attack, and you're also going to want to focus on her elemental skill. I'd say level them up in equity. They're both equally as important to each other, so you're not going to want to kind of pass up one over the other. And her elemental burst is nice. It just provides a little bit of extra passive damage when you do hit an opponent with it, but it's not necessarily necessary, and sometimes it can actually screw up some Vaporize triggers if you are consistently applying, Hydro with Yelan or Xingqiu or Mona or Furina. If you don't get enough Hydro on the opponent and you keep getting these ticks of Pyro damage, you might not be triggering Vaporize every time that Yoimiya essentially normal attacks. So that is something that you do want to be wary of. Now, with Furina here, I am going to be running her with her best-in-slot weapon, which is the Splendor of Tranquil Waters. It scales with crit damage, and it also helps boost elemental skill damage based off of HP. Now, with artifacts, you're typically going to want to run her, Golden Troop, unless you're doing a different weapon combination. Now, with Furina, the alternative option, I guess you could say, would be like Festering Desire because of the energy recharge that's on there. If you were able to get it. If not, you can fish for the Fluve Sender Ferryman, which is another really good option. And I would kind of stick around there. You can get a little bit more finicky with like crit damage or crit rate based swords, but most of her scaling comes around HP percent and energy recharge. So you're going to want to try and keep that in the books here. And talent-wise, you're really just going to want to prioritize your elemental skill and ultimate. Her ultimate is amazing for damage boosting across the team, and her elemental skill really, just pumps out damage. It is amazing, and it especially is wonderful when you do need a little bit of extra healing on the field and you need to swap into its other state. You just get some passive healing going on there for the on-field character. Next up, we're going to be looking at a physical Eula DPS build. Eula hasn't been getting a lot of, attention in the limelight lately because she's been kind of phased out and she kind of hasn't been really looked at. But her kit is still really wonderful, and for a physical carry, if you want to do something a little bit different, she is always a great option. So getting into Eula here, her best slot is going to be the Song of Broken Pines. I do not have it. I'm going to be running the Wolf's Gravestone here. It's another great 5-star Claymore option for her. I was digging a little bit into some of her free-to-play weapons, and the Prototype Archaic seems to be one of the best options that is craftable. There are other options that you can get from the Battle Pass, but that's still not, necessarily free-to-play. And her best-in-slot artifacts are typically going to be the Pale Flame set. You really want to focus on stacking critical damage and kind of avoiding anything cryo or anything like that. Physical damage goblet 100%, attack percent sands, crit rate or crit damage goblet depending on whatever you need. You're going to want to focus on leveling up her burst and her normal attack mainly. You will be normal attacking to help build stacks for her burst. You will also be using your elemental skill to build stacks on her burst, but I would mainly focus on normal attack and burst. Elemental skill is really what you use to generate energy if you don't have another battery in the party. Looking into Raiden here, we're going to be taking her with Engulfing Lightning, and that is her current best-in-slot weapon. A great free-to-play option for her is the Catch, and that is a very, very popular weapon that performs almost as well as the Engulfing, and it is overall a very, very good pick. So with the artifacts on her, her damage is mainly going to be scaling off of her energy recharge. So you want to stack it on pretty much everything that you can, while also being able to have either an electro damage goblet or an attack percent goblet, and typically a crit rate or crit damage circlet. Now, with talents here, you really want to focus on having her burst and elemental skill leveled up. You're typically not going to be normal attacking with her, and it doesn't really do anything outside of, just being a typical normal or charged attack. When she does use her burst, it essentially imbues her polearm with electro damage, and it counts as burst damage, not as normal attack damage here. So, getting into Rosaria here, she has been kind of, not picked up, and she's kind of a little bit underrated, but for weapons, she has some really, really great options. You could run the Staff of Homa on her, but Wavebreaker's Fin is also another great option, considering that in a lot of times she's going to be played in that battery scenario where she's just generating particles for the team through her elemental burst and elemental skill. Getting energy recharge on her is going to boost her damage with this weapon. It's also going to boost you know, your party's particle gain, it's going to be awesome. With artifacts, you get a little bit crazy here. You can do Gladiator, you can do Blizzard Strayer, you can do Emblem of the Severed Fate, you can do Noblesse Oblige. You can really kind of mix and mash it depending on what kind of elemental damage you want and where you want her damage or energy recharge to come from. Now, with her constellations, it works really well in this team because with Divine Retribution, this decreases opponents' physical resistance. So essentially, whenever you use her Rites of Termination, this is going to happen. It's going to be awesome, and that's why she works so well in this team. So by creating that Electro and Cryo combination, you get Superconduct, and by breaking down Superconduct, it increases physical damage essentially. And we're running Xilonen here just to be able to kind of act as another damage buffer for the elemental types, albeit she does not buff physical damage. She's just going to be decreasing the enemy's resistances for Cryo and Electro. Next, we have our Ayato Catalyze team. So this team's mainly going to be focused around applying Hydro and essentially Dendro in a way that allows Raiden to apply a ton of electro damage so that it creates quicken or aggravate reactions, but also Hyperbloom reactions. So, you know, when Ayato is not in his elemental skill and you just have either Raiden on field or Nahida on field, when you're using Raiden's ult, it's going to be in a quicken or aggravate state. And when you do have Ayato's skill up and you are running him, you are going to be having that, you know, Hyperbloom scenario. So with Furina, Raiden, we're going to be keeping her the same. Now, Ayato gets a little bit tricky because, you know, he is actually like a ping-based character. If you're not familiar with ping, it's essentially, you know, the connection that you do have to, like, the Genshin servers and how long it's taking from the server to communicate to, you know, your router or your computer. So if you have high ping, it essentially means that, you know, you're getting a lot of lag between the server and your client. And if you have low ping, it means there's very minimal lag. So, you know, this can get tricky with weapons and artifacts. So I'll dig into it a little bit. So with weapons, I am going to be running them with Wolf Fang because I don't technically have much better. And I do need the crit rate, and it also boosts elemental skill and burst damage just inherently, which is wonderful. And it does increase crit rate based on elemental burst hit and elemental skill hits every, like, I think it's like 0.1 seconds. Oh, it says it right there, 0.1 seconds. There you go. So it's pretty good at just boosting crit rate. You know, it's a crit rate stat stick. You throw more crit rate on it, you can just end up taking a ton of crit rate on his artifacts here because all this is going to be boosted up. Now, I like running him with the Heart of Depths because my ping is not the greatest, and this will give you more consistent damage if you do have a higher ping, albeit the Echoes of Offering is his best in slot artifact set if you are, you know, in more of a low ping scenario, and it is better to use a crit damage weapon if you are running the Echoes of Offering set typically. Now, another good option would probably be the Aminoma Kageuchi, which is a craftable, like, well, it's a craftable sword from Inazuma. It's wonderful. It's a really good stick. It does a lot for the character. You know, and that's probably his other best in slot option for free to play. You know, if you have it, the Haran Kapaku or whatever it is, that 5-star weapon is his signature. It's also his best in slot. You could also take Black Sword or Wolf's Fang, or sorry, the Black Sword. You know, as that does also have crit rate on it, and it provides passive healing, and the only weird thing is that it, I believe it increases, like, charge attack damage, which is not the greatest. Actually, I'll check so I don't feed you wrong info. Yeah, it increases normal and charge attack damage. So when Ayato's in his skill, he's not dealing normal or charge attack damage, I believe. I believe it is considered elemental skill damage. No, it converts his normal attacks into AoE Hydro damage. So maybe that's actually a good option then. I don't know. I haven't tested it out, so don't check me on that one. But it is probably a good weapon as well. But that is a, I believe that's a Battle Pass weapon, so you'd have to go through that route to get it. Nahida, I am going to be running her own signature, which is the 1,000 Floating Dreams Catalyst, and this is great because it boosts her overall elemental mastery. Other great options for Nahida that are actually craftable would be the Mapamare. I'm not sure if I have one. I do have one. This is great because it's an elemental mastery stat stick, and it increases elemental damage bonus if you can get the refinements high enough by, I think, like 16%, and it can stack up twice, so it's pretty good because Nahida is always going to be applying Dendro through her elemental skill, so it's actually a pretty good stick, even though it's not really used too widely for other characters. Artifacts-wise, you're pretty much going to always want to run the Deepwood Memories set, just because it boosts Dendro damage and it decreases Dendro resistance of targets by 30% after skills or bursts hit them. So with Nahida, you're constantly triggering her skill, constantly decreasing Dendro res. This is perfect because, you know, when Hyperbloom or Quicken or Aggravate are going to be going off, it just means that Dendro resistance is even lower, so it's going to end up being a better time for you. With talents, you're really going to want to focus on elemental skill and elemental burst. I realize I just skipped over Ayato's. Elemental skill, that's what you want. Burst is nice to have as extra damage, but really just level as elemental skill. Next, we're going to be keeping that same team format, except we're going to be focusing more on, you know, a Hyperbloom situation here. So with the dual Dendro resistance shred? I think it's resistant. No, it's elemental mastery bonus. For Hyperbloom, this is going to be increasing elemental mastery across the board for all party members by 20. So this is really, really wonderful. If you were going to just trigger, you know, Quicken or... if you were going to trigger Quicken, I think it's 50. Or... no, it's 30. So you get a base 50 and then an additional 20 on top of that. So... you know, typically that's what it's going to be like for this Hyperbloom scenario. Keeping things in mind, Tighnari actually has a lot of versatility. His best in slot is the Hunter's Path, but another good option that you can get is the Scion of the Blazing Sun. I am going to be running him with the first Great Magic because I just need a crit damage stat stick for him, and this also is wonderful because it increases his charged attack damage, since this is what you're mainly going to be doing in his kit through his rotations, and with... I'd say you'd be using his burst probably every rotation. Sometimes it can get a little bit funky and you might not have enough energy for it, but running him with a Dendro battery like Nahida or a Dendro puffer, you're typically going to have enough energy for it. So it should be all right, and it doesn't necessarily calculate it as burst damage. It gets a little weird, but you know, I can dig into that in another video. With artifacts, he's very flexible as well. You can run him with, you know, a charge attack boosting set like Wanderer's Troop. Depends on, you know, what kind of weapon you want to run, though. If you're going to run, like, the Prototype Crescent on him, which is a great free-to-play craftable option, this increases attack based off of charge attack hits. So if you're gunning for weak spot, charge attack hits, you could stack charge attack with your Wanderer's Troop and really just focus on, you know, gunning for that in your build. But you could also run, like, the Windbloom Ode just as an elemental mastery stat stick, and this boosts his overall attack by 32% whenever he uses a skill. And to trigger his charged attacks, he's going to be using his elemental skill frequently to essentially enable him to have these quick fire, you know, I guess you could say charge attacks. So that's also really good. Lastly, I would touch on Gilded Dreams because it is an elemental mastery boosting set. I'd love to know if I had a piece for Gilded Dreams just to demonstrate here. I must have a goblet or something. I don't ever really remember farming this domain. Here we go. Yeah, so it's going to be increasing elemental mastery, and whenever you trigger elemental reactions, it's going to be boosting, you know, other party members' attack, and they're going to also be gaining elemental buffs. And this effect can trigger pretty frequently, but I wouldn't really run Gilded Dreams unless you're more focused on having him as like a sub-DPS or kind of in that range. Typically, I found this to be a really good option, especially since it is fairly easy to get. You know, you get it from world bosses, you get it from trounce bosses. A lot of people have some pretty good pieces in Wanderer's Troop or Gladiators, so it makes it a lot easier to build him and have him in a flexible position. So you can just stack crit damage, you can just stack crit ratio. My ratios aren't that great, but, you know, it's still pretty alright. Ideally, you'll have a little bit more energy recharge to just help him get that burst up. So yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and let me know your thoughts. Cheers.